Good evening and welcome to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. My name is Mariana Wertzman and I am a librarian right here on the fourth floor. If you speak, read, or aspire to read books in foreign languages, come and see me on the fourth floor. For everything else, it's the rest of the building. Um, if your New Year's resolution is to read more, you are in the right place. In addition to reading materials, we strive to offer our patrons a variety of learning opportunities. This year, New York Public Library will celebrate America's 250th anniversary. Millions of Americans will be learning more about our nation's principles. I hope they will. Tonight, we salute everyone in this audience and at home for making a commitment to a very challenging task of understanding legal constitutional history. You will read the book, right? Okay. I'm grateful to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for offering us an opportunity to learn about the development of the principles of equality from the country's leading constitutional scholar. Our distinguished guest speaker and an author of the Born Equal, Remaking America's Constitution, 1840 to 1920, Akhil Reed Amar is a Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University, where he teaches constitutional law in both Yale College and Yale Law School. His work has won awards from both the American Bar Association and the Federalist Society. He has been cited by Supreme Court justices across the spectrum of more than 50 cases, tops among the scholars under the age of 70. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and has written widely in popular publications, including Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the Washington Post, the Time, and the Atlantic. He was an informal consultant to the popular TV show, The West Wing, and his scholarship has been showcased on many broadcasts, including the Morning Joe, Fox News at night with Shannon Bream and Fareed Zakaria. He's an author of more than 100 law review articles and several books, including the first volume of his ambitious trilogy on American constitutional history from the founding to the present, The Words That Made Us, America's Constitutional Conversation, 1760-1840. Born Equal is the second part of this trilogy, and please welcome our distinguished guest for tonight, Akhil Reed Amar.
Such an honor to be with you all this evening. You can all hear me, I hope. So thank you for this kind invitation. As you just heard, we Americans celebrate this year our 250th birthday. Now, the question is, I said, we Americans, what makes us Americans? What do we have in common? What should we be celebrating? Here's a sobering analysis. We Americans don't have very much in common. We don't have race. We don't have national origin. Our forebears come from every continent. That's not true of many other places around the world. We don't have religion. We don't really even have politics. We're deeply divided. We don't have geography. We're a vast continent, and even within smaller parts of it, there are deep divisions between the city and the hinterlands. There are huge regional differences between north and south, east and west, coasts and and heartland. So how have we made it 250 years? And are we going to make it for another 50, much less 250? Those are the sobering questions I think we should be asking ourselves at this moment of celebration. here's my thought, that really what we have in common as Americans is our history and our canonical texts that provide basically the spine, the backbone, the skeleton of America. And if you don't know those, you don't have enough in common to converse with your fellow citizens. And I don't think, actually, most of us, I'm very grateful you all came out. There are other things to do, and what a beautiful evening. A little crisp, but spectacular for January. And thank you to some of the others who are here virtually. Very grateful that you're spending your time with each other and with me. So I'm preaching to the converted in some ways already. There's a self-selection here. But even the people who came here, my claim is many of you don't know the American story because the things that you were taught, some of the same things that I was taught, and they're not quite true. And that's why I'm writing books, a trilogy, that try to tell the story of America, I think the true story of America, the good and the bad, and try to tell you things that are different from what I was taught, because the narrative that we have thus far, if we have a narrative at all, I think is flawed. So, these are hugely ambitious books. They aim to do nothing less than to save the world, because we are the one indispensable nation in the world. If you don't love a world led by the United States of America, would you prefer a world led by China or Russia or no one, or the Europeans if they could lead anywhere, which they can't, or a world with no leadership at all? And if the world is to be led by the one indispensable nation, the only nation that really, democratic nation that brings together the descendants of all the other continents, because that's not France, that's not Germany, that's not Norway, that's us. And if we are going to lead and be the indispensable nation, that means us. We pick our leaders, and we need to know the story, and our leaders need to know the story. And the first thing that our supreme leader is supposed to do is to raise their right hand and say, I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Well, they need to know what the Constitution actually says. And you have to hold them accountable, and so you need to know what the Constitution actually says, and many of you don't. And I'm grateful that you're here. It's going to take you a while to learn it, and the books are going to help you with that. And behind the Constitution is the story, the narrative. The last 250 years, actually even more than 250, I get a running start in my trilogy. I start in 1760. I tell you the story of America. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And then you'll ask me questions, maybe about history, maybe about law, maybe about current events. And this is the beginning. Now, I'm very greedy, and I'm not truthfully interested so much in whether you buy the book. My publisher would like you to buy the book. I don't care so much. I want you to read the damn thing, okay? And you can read it without buying it. We're here in a library, okay? And you could buy it and not read it, and I would be very disappointed. So I want, and the price of the book is minuscule for many, at least, of the people here in this audience. Not for all of you, but this is New York City. I know how much a bagel costs in this place, okay? So, and you can get the book on Amazon for $23 or in a bookstore for $40. And here in New York City, that's not a lot for many of you. No, I'm asking for something so much more valuable than $23 or whatever. I'm asking for hours and hours of your precious time. And you could be doing other things with that, with your life force. So I know what I'm asking. But if you don't do it, and people like you don't do it, we die. Because every generation, actually, we're just one generation away from barbarism. We have to actually replenish our civic identity with an engagement with these key texts. I would say the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence above all else. And I'm including, of course, the amendments as part of the Constitution. That's part of the story of this evening. And that's what these books are about. They're about the story of America. They're not about the story of my ancestors, my blood. My family comes here pretty late in the story, and we're not white, and we're not black, and we're not red. We're this other kind of thing. And I could be wrong about a lot of what I said, but I'm not trying to tell you my politics or my personal identity. I'm trying to tell you the story of us, we the people of the United States, what it is that we actually have in common, because to repeat, we don't have that much. So, Volume 1 is entitled, oh, it's even longer than this one. And it's called The Words That Made Us, America's Constitutional Conversation, 1760-1840. Now, the subtitle is, it's about the Constitution. It's about conversation, people talking to each other. What a concept. Listening to each other. Wow, what a concept. 1760 is where the book begins. We're not an us yet. We're not a we them. This is the words that made us, how we become a we, how we become we the people of the United States. There's a pun in there, how we become the United States, us, U.S., and us, a we the people of the United States. And at the beginning, we have geographic proximity. We're 13 contiguous British colonies on the mainland, and we don't even talk to each other. New Yorkers don't talk to Virginians, don't talk to South Carolinians. There are newspapers in each place. They don't publish stories from other places. They don't, in a word, retweet. There's not actually, you can measure these things. There's not actually that kind of conversation. And then for various reasons that I explain in this book, Britain, first through imperial neglect and then through actually imperial oppression, pushes the 13 colonies closer together, and they form a we, first very loosely with the Declaration of Independence, and then much more tightly with a constitution that actually provides for an indivisible union. Once you're in, you're in. Oh, I just told you something pretty important about the next period, which is the Civil War period. So that's Volume 1, The Words That Made Us, America's Constitutional Conversation, 1760 to 1840. Why 1760? Because that's actually when the conversation begins. It's different from almost every other book. Every other book you'd ever read about the early period would begin in 1763. This book begins in 1760 for reasons that you'll understand if you read chapter 1. It ends in 1840 in part because that's when the founding generation dies off. Now, you know more than you think, truthfully. I'm going to challenge you and tell you some of the things that you know are not quite right. But that's a book that's mainly about 6 people. They're the 6 great founders by acclamation, the 6 great men, and they were men, white men, of the founding generation. And you know them, and we're going to play a family feud right here. Okay, survey says. So who are the 6 preeminent leaders of the American founding period? They are, shout out their names. Franklin, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and we said Adams. So Washington, and yes, I heard the final one. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison, your first 4 presidents, and then your 2 geniuses. I heard Franklin. Oh, thank you. This is New York City, and there are a million things I haven't done. But just you wait, and that book is dedicated to Lin Miranda and to his wife, Vanessa Nadal, and to Ron Chernow, who wrote a book about Hamilton, who was a Yale graduate. So, of course, Hamilton. How does such a low-born guy rise so high? Well, that turns out to be a story in Volume 2, which is a little bit less white. And see, I just proved to you we're Americans. You actually have a sense of your cultural identity, you see, because they can't answer that question if I go to Paris and just say who are the 6 great founders, or if I go to Kiev. No, they may not know that story, or New Delhi. But you're Americans and you know that story. But some of what you know isn't quite true. The father of the Constitution is James Madison. Yeah, of course. No, that's absurd. James Madison is 5'4". No one's ever heard of him at Philadelphia. None of his ideas, actually, that are distinctive are adopted. Okay? Our national capital is not known as Madison, D.C. That 555-foot thing there is not the Madison Monument. He's not there on Mount Rushmore because he lets the Capitol burn to the ground on his watch. Okay? He's not the unanimously elected presiding officer at Philadelphia or the unanimously elected first president, unanimously re-elected first president. Of course it's Washington. He's the father of the country and therefore the Constitution. And if you don't understand that, you don't know shit about the Constitution. Okay? Because it actually matters that it's created by someone who knows he's going to be the first president. And that's why it creates a ridiculously strong presidency that should scare the hell out of you. Okay? Because if, I know this is just a hypothetical, but suppose it fell in the wrong hands, that presidency. Okay. And the reason that presidents can fire people at will in their department is not because the text of the Constitution doesn't say very much about firing. It says a lot about hiring. But my former student, Becca Kelly Slaughter, is going to lose her case. And she's going to lose her case because of things that George Washington implemented as the first president. It's called the Decision of 1789. And how broadly do you read that or not? Because he insisted that he had to be able to fire people at will. So it matters that Washington is the father of the country and the Constitution, and you thought it was James Madison. No one's heard of James Madison, whereas George Washington had the only army on the continent, and he gave it up. Wow. That's what virtue looks like. Not trying to seek a third term when you're not ineligible, just saying. Okay. You've heard of the Federalist Papers. They're a series of newspaper pamphlets, op-eds in support of the Constitution. And the most important Federalist paper is the Federalist number 10, of course. No, that's absurd. No one pays any attention to the Federalist 10 at the time. This can be proved now with computer searches, although I asserted it many years ago. But now computer searches can prove all of this, that no one paid any attention to Federalist 10 at the time or for the next 100 years. And they did pay attention to other Federalist papers. If you had a good reason why people should vote for the Constitution, because that's what these are op-eds saying vote for the Constitution. If you had a good reason, would you wait till your 10th op-ed to make it? Of course you wouldn't. You're a really smart audience. You got good scores in AP history and AP government. Those are the right answers. I was taught the same stuff, but it's wrong. And it matters that it's wrong, that it's not Federalist 10. If you have to read a Federalist paper, read tonight, take you 3 minutes, Federalist number 8, which synthesizes the arguments of Federalist numbers 2 through 7, and it's a different argument for union than the one you were taught. It's more of a Washingtonian argument. It's more of a Hamiltonian argument. It's not a Madisonian argument. Now, why did you say Federalist 10? Why did you say Madison? Because there was a guy, an Ivy League professor, and he wrote the single most important book about the Constitution of the last century. And he said it's Federalist 10 and it's Madison, and actually the Constitution actually wasn't about democracy, it was about the fat cat of by and for the 1%, and Federalist 10 is actually admitting all of that. And he wrote the most important book about the Constitution of the last century, and he got everyone to pay attention to 10. And he taught at a great Ivy League university in this great city. And the university is, because there's only one Ivy League university in this great city, Columbia, and his name was Charles Beard, and the book is An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, and he influenced all your teachers, and therefore you, and you didn't even know that. But it's because of a book by Beard, and it's bullshit. It's wrong. I disproved it 20 years ago in America's Constitution, a biography, because there's a new century and a new Ivy League professor who wrote a different book that I believe is the definitive book of this century on the Constitution. And I know who I am, and maybe you don't. I'm not modest, but neither was Alexander Hamilton, okay? But I am honest and good, and you got to read the book and decide for yourself. Okay, because he hid all sorts of things from you, did Beard. He didn't tell you that they put the Constitution to a vote up and down the continent, and in 8 of the 13 states, property qualifications were lowered or eliminated for that special vote. We, the people, did, in actual fact, ordain and establish a Constitution in a remarkably democratic way, but that didn't fit Beard's, take. His modern-day popularizer is Howard Zinn, and this is what many of you were taught, and it's false, you see. In New York, in 8 of the 13 states, property qualifications were lowered or eliminated for this special ratification moment. Wow, did you know that? I didn't. No one did before America's constitutional biography came along and actually checked the facts. Here in New York, here were the rules for the ratification of the Constitution. All free adult males citizens could vote. No race tests, no property qualifications, even though those were the rules for ordinary elections, but not for this one. No religious tests. Wow. Okay, one more thing, and then I'll tell you about the new book. So, how many of you know 1619? If I just say 1619, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, and that's the problem with the New York Times. Okay, which is going to be publishing my stuff very soon, so I better be careful about what I say about the Gray Lady. Now, 1619 is when Old World slavery, in effect, comes from the New World. Ships from Africa arrive on the shores of what's now the mainland U.S., Jamestown, 1619. First slave ships from Africa. But so what? There was slavery here in the New World way before those slave ships arrived, among the Aztecs and the Mayas and many other native peoples enslaving each other. Slavery exists in all the continents long before 1619, in Africa among Africans, in Asia among Asians, in Europe. That's why we call them the Slavs, because they're slaves, okay? Slavery exists in almost all times and places, some forms of unfreedom. It's nothing unique to the United States, what would become the United States, or 1619. Now, the Old World also had an idea of freeing individual slaves, what we would call manumission or emancipation. And you know some of these stories. How many of you, this is, my demographic is a little closer to your age group. How many of you saw Ben-Hur? So Charlton Heston is a slave and he gets his freedom. Or a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. Zero Mostel is a slave and he connives for his freedom. So the ancient world has slavery and idea of freeing slaves. Here's what the ancient world does not have. Jesus doesn't say this. Old Testament doesn't say this. New Testament doesn't say this. No one says it. For a very long time, abolition, not freeing slaves, ending slavery. Maybe gradually, but ending slavery altogether. Where do we get that idea and when? Who came up with it and how? I'm asking you, because that seems to me pretty important. Because now we don't have slavery in the world, and we used to have it almost everywhere. Where did we get the idea of abolishing slavery in the world? Because you're going to tell me something, and I'm going to tell you, no, that's not right. What are you going to tell me? Who and when? That's what you think about British and Wilberforce, and eventually in and he's mentioned, I promise you, in chapter 1, in 1833, the Brits end slavery, not in the empire, only in the western part of the empire. They didn't end it in my family's part of the empire, South Asia. So, it looks a little different, No, the Brits are bums, okay? They're not great. That's why we revolted against them. But Americans don't even tell our own story of American greatness, which I believe in, and I'm a Democrat, okay? So, abolition comes to the world. The first abolition society in the world is formed in Philadelphia in 1775. And its presidents will soon be Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence. Ooh. And immediately, this is the intro to this book, which, if you listen to the audio version, is narrated by my friend John Mulaney. Now, truthfully, I've been told that the rest of the audio isn't so great. John Mulaney didn't do that. Someone else did. And several people have told me they don't like it. I haven't listened to it, okay? And I like people to read. And this has endnotes and all the rest. So I'm a paper kind of guy. But John Mulaney narrates, he's my friend, the intro. And if you listen to him or you read the intro, you will know that immediately upon independence, Americans start ending slavery. So final little game, I'm going to play word association game with you. I'm going to say a phrase, and you're going to tell me who and where, what person and what place come to mind. Phrase is the Declaration of Independence. Who comes to mind and what place, what jurisdictions? So who? The Declaration of Independence is? Jefferson. Of course, that's what you're going to say. And so which state? And it is in Philadelphia. Which state? therefore. Yeah, that's what you've been taught. And then all men are created equal looks like BS because Jefferson never frees his slaves and Virginia doesn't end slavery, and it's just going to look like it's all a farce. But right next to Thomas Jefferson is a guy named Benjamin Franklin from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania. And right next to him is John Adams, who's from Massachusetts. And immediately after July 4th, 1776, in that same building, Benjamin Franklin is going to preside over a state constitutional convention in what we call Independence Hall. You know, back then it was the Pennsylvania State House. And they adopt a constitution, a state constitution, that says all men are born equally free and independent, which will lead to the abolition of slavery by statute beginning in 1780, based on a state constitution of 1776 that is a version of all men are created equal, born equal. All men are born free and equal. And that will happen in Massachusetts in a convention presided over by John Adams in 1780 that says all men are born free and equal, which will lead immediately to abolition, not emancipation, manumission, abolition in Massachusetts by judges and juries in the early 1780s. And that's the same language, all men are born free and equal, that will be used in our lifetime, 2003, I think, maybe 2005, in the Goodrich case to establish a right of gay Americans to have same-sex marriage because everyone's born equal, black or white, male or female, Jew or Gentile, in wedlock or out of wedlock. How does a bastard, orphan? So it doesn't matter whether you're born in wedlock or out of wedlock or gay or straight, you see. It's a profound idea, this birth equality idea. We're still trying to catch up with it today. And it's not a Brit idea. They still today are, bowing to this idiot just because he popped out of someone's womb in a certain way, Charles III I'm talking about. I don't like him, and the Brits didn't get to vote for him, and they can't vote him out of office. They can't impeach him, and we can impeach Trump. And we will, by the way. We won't convict him, but we will when the Democrats win in November, which most people, I teach political science, are predicting. There'll be a third impeachment. It won't result in a conviction, but that's on us. We picked him, okay? And we can get rid of him. That's not true of Charles. So they don't believe in Britain even today. Don't give them credit for all this stuff. It's 1833. No, we did this. And I say we, this is not my blood, not my forebears. But you don't even know the story, which is bad in some ways on slavery, but better than you thought on other things about American equality. I was going to read you a passage, some passages, 10 different ways of reading, of interpreting one fraught phrase, all men are created equal. Because we had these debates. They were constitutional debates among really pretty impressive lawyers. One was named Lincoln, one was named Douglass, and people paid attention. And they were debating first principles of constitutionalism and basically not just narrowly constitutionalism, but the meaning of life, or at least the meaning of our political life together. How are we supposed to interact with each other? And Abe Lincoln says one thing, and Stephen Douglas says another, and people are watching and listening. And they're not just hurling insults at each other in 140 character or 280 character little things, tweets or whatever they're called. We picked a president that way and I don't think we could now because, in an era of television, Abe is not much to look at. And he is actually pretty good at sound bites. He really is, but he wants to make an argument, and people are willing to listen to an argument back then. And are we today? That's a real question. So my 6 heroes of the last book were your 4 presidents, first presidents, and your 2 geniuses. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and Hamilton. This volume begins in 1840. The founders have now all died off. And the question is the next generation going to be able to carry the project forward? And, most importantly, make amends for the greatest sins of the Founding Fathers. Try to repair their greatest lapses. Amendments, at their best, are a making of amends. Slavery was a deep part of the original Constitution. It had to be, because you had to get the South on board. Otherwise, there's no we. And if the South isn't on board, if South Carolina is not on board, indivisibly, here's the problem. If South Carolina can secede, they can't. I prove that in Volume 1. But if they could, then, if they could secede today, then tomorrow they can make a treaty with Vladimir Putin. And the day after tomorrow, there will be Russians in the Carolinas, which is not where you want them. You want them halfway across the world, and Americans are free because of our oceans and our borders, and I take that seriously, and Trump understands that in ways that many of us Democrats don't. But if you read my books, I'll show you what this is about. It's about George Washington, who understands defensible borders and other stuff. James Madison, not so much. Federalist 10 is not where it's at. Read Federalist 8, which is all about geography. We want to be an island nation because an island nation actually won't need an army, and a big one. And if you don't have a big army, there's going to be more liberty. That's actually the theory of the Constitution. And it makes no sense today because, or at least it's very different, because you have inherited the largest military, industrial, and carceral complex in the history of the world, and that should scare the hell out of you, because that's not the founders' world. It's not what led to actually American freedom for the first 150 years. So, and that's why it matters whether it's Federalist 10 or Federalist 8, which is all about geography and defensible borders, and why it matters that it's actually about George Washington, who was a general whom you could trust to not tyrannize. And he doesn't have sons, because you got to worry about these people with sons, because they want their sons to be powerful, whether their sons. So George Washington has no sons. Thomas Jefferson has no sons. James Madison has no sons. James Monroe has no sons. So John Adams has a son. His name is Q, as in W, as in Donald Jr., as in RFK Jr. And if you don't understand that, you're missing a lot, and you got to read the damn books. You see? Now, I'm going to segue pretty quickly, even a little earlier than I was supposed to, into Q&A. But before I do, let me tell you about I told you now, the Volume 1 is about 6, dead white guys. And don't blame me. You gave me the names, okay? I'm not making that up. That's just how Family Feud works. In Volume 2, they're going to try to get rid of the sin of slavery and commit themselves to equality. As Act 1, Scene 1 opens, there is entrenched slavery across much of America. And people like Lincoln thinks that's not what America's about. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty, not slavery, not 1619, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, he's got a certain reading of it. Other people have other readings. I give you 10 different readings in the middle of this book of just those 5 words. All men are created equal, or born equal, if you like. 10 different ways of thinking about that. And that's what the Lincoln-Douglas debates are all about. That's what the 1860 election is all about. It's actually what the 1864 election is all about. And it will culminate in this great debate, a 13th Amendment abolishing slavery and a 14th promising birthright citizenship to all black, white, male, female, Jew, Gentile, gay, straight, in wedlock, out of wedlock. A 15th Amendment saying whether you're born black or white, you should be equally eligible to vote. Eventually, a 19th Amendment saying whether you're born male or female, you should be equally eligible to vote. That's the birth equality revolution that this book tells you about. Now, I have a different cast of characters, and especially if it's about birth equality, it's awkward if it's going to be 6 dead white men. So I've already obviously told you, at its core, it has to be about Abe Lincoln, who is very low born. He's born in wedlock, but born in the dirt. His father is barely literate. Mother dies when he's 9 years old or so. No family fortune, no family name, no family power base. How does a bastard orphan? No. How does Abe Lincoln, this nobody from frickin' nowhere, become president of the United States twice? My answer is by being a lot smarter, by working a lot harder, by reading every book and treatise in the land, and by knowing his Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the story backwards and forwards and sideways. And he becomes president by giving an amazing speech in this city, in a place called Cooper Institute, Cooper Union, when he actually makes originalist arguments about what the founders were trying to do and not do on slavery. Really impressive. And we pick him because he actually knows the American story and can tell it. He doesn't hide the bad parts, but he can tell it in a way that makes us proud of genuine American greatness. So I got 3 other main characters in this volume. The book is dedicated to these 4 icons. Whom would you pick if you're trying to tell a story of equality in this period between 1840, which starts with slavery and ends with women's suffrage, and in between we have equal racial suffrage and birthright citizenship and fundamental rights and the abolition of slavery? Whom would you pick? Frederick Douglass is one of my 4. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is another one of my 4. Now, the 4th one you probably won't pick. You'll probably say Susan B. Anthony, who is great, but she's really Elizabeth's. I'm on a first-name basis with these people, and you will be too when you read the book, because I'll introduce you to them. You'll get into their diaries and into their heads. So it is about Abe, and about Frederick, and about Elizabeth. Susan is really Elizabeth's sidekick, so it's not Susan. And good that you're not picking, because I'll tell you, and you'll actually maybe nod your head, but she's not actually quite treated as canonical. She's the first important woman on center stage in America. Abigail is smart, but she has to be off stage, okay? And there is a moment when all America politically is talking about a woman, everyone, and she's not Taylor Swift, and she's not Beyonce, huh? No. Sojourner Truth isn't even literate. See, if I were PC, that's what I would do, because white man, white woman, black woman. But no, you can't dominate Americans' constitutional conversation if you're not literate. So it can't be Sojourner Truth or Sojourner Truth actually is literate. Harriet Tubman is not. But Sojourner Truth, we don't actually have writings, and we just have actually accounts of her speeches that actually aren't faithful. Like, aren't I a woman? No, she didn't speak like that. Her first language was Dutch. She's not going to speak like a Southern, black when saying "ain't I a slave?" or "no, ain't I, a woman?" So unfortunately, we don't have her in her own authentic voice in a way that we can rely on. Harriet Beecher Stowe, who said that? Yes, on the nose. She sells millions of copies of this book. That book sells more copies than anything and any single book that Mark Twain ever wrote, or Nathaniel Hawthorne, or Herman Melville. That book sells more copies than any other book of the century, and it's all about slavery, and she changes how people think about it. And it's about women, female slaves, not just male slaves, and children. It's an epic book, and I put her in the center of the story. When Lincoln meets her, he says, "You're the little woman who wrote the big book that made this great war." Oh, she comes from a preaching family. Religion is really important. Quakers are important. Other abolitionists. Someone said when they mentioned anti-slavery, they said British Methodists, I think someone said, and that might include Wilberforce and others. She comes from a very, family of preachers. Anyone know who her brother is? He's the most famous preacher in America. He's an early version of Billy Graham. Henry Ward Beecher. And what are his, apart from being her brother, what are his biggest claims to fame? Well, one is He invites a guy named Lincoln to come speak in New York. That's Cooper Union. That's Henry Ward Beecher. And the other is later on he gets himself into a massive sex scandal that's really interesting that I don't go into, except just to tell you it's ugly. Okay, so I think maybe I've told you just enough. I want to get you involved early in this conversation, but I'm greedy. I want more of your time. If you can't read the book, here's what you can do. I've got a free weekly podcast. This next week, we'll launch our 6th year. It's our 5th anniversary. I do it with a retired ophthalmologist who's really brilliant, who represents the general public, asks me questions. We talk about things. We have often really interesting guests from across the spectrum, Bob Woodward, Gary Hart, Steve Breyer, for whom I clerked. They're kind of all left of center. The founder and national co-chair of the Federalist Society, Steve Calabrese, he's probably been on 8 or 10 times. He can talk about unitary executive theory, other things. Ed Whalen, who's a Scalia clerk, very prominent conservative. So we don't do food fights, but it's an hour and a half every week. It is free. How many of you are lawyers in this group? You can get CLE credit for free by listening to this thing. I'm going to tell you something. This is true. Justices listen to this podcast. I know this to be true. Their clerks listen to this podcast. It will make you smarter if you listen to it, and it's free. So you're going to ask me questions. Sometimes my answer is going to be, here's the 1-minute answer for a 15-minute answer. See the podcast or listen to the podcast episode. What do you want to talk about? Oh, and Volume 3 is going to take the story from 1920 to the present moment. It's all about America and the world. America becomes more global with immigration reform. Oh, yeah, we had one in the 1960s. And the world becomes more American because the American democratic idea sweeps the world after World War II. And it's imperfect and it's struggling here as well as other places. But that book is tentatively entitled Earth's Best Hope. And I still do believe that America is Earth's best hope. It's the story of America's Constitution from 1920 to the present moment. So that's the trilogy. I want you to read it because it'll make you smarter and you'll understand your world better than you did and what you have in common with other Americans, because you don't have very much other than this narrative, this story. So what would you like to talk about, my friends? Please, in the back.
Thank you very much. Curious about this subheading, Remaking America's Constitution. I heard remaking, and I thought, well, that sounds like a tearing down and a renovation of the Constitution, when really what I'm hearing from you is something like a perfection of the ideals of the American Constitution as originally set forth. Can you comment on that?
I think both of those. We call it the reconstruction. Maybe most of you, just in apartments or co-ops, you can't quite do this. But those of us who live out in the country, I've gone through lots of remodels, and there's a tearing down and a building up. And it's happening apparently in the White House right now with that new wing. So it's punning on the first book, which is the words that made us. This is a remaking, a reconstruction. Yes, it is a perfecting of the project, but we're not done by 1920. We'll never be done. The pyramid is perpetually unfinished, that pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. So it is trying to make it a still more perfect union. Maybe we'll never get there. And if you look carefully at this, there's a kind of a pun also. The two horizontal red lines are an equal sign, you see. So it's gesturing back. I originally wanted to call it the words that made us equal. And it would be more obviously a sequel. The words that made us equal. And my publisher said, no, that sounds too much like a sequel. And I said, that's great, And she says, no, you're going to limit your audience. The only people who are going to read it are the people who read the first one. You don't have to have read the first one. And she said, there's this movie, it's called The Madness of King George. It was originally entitled The Madness of King George III, but they got rid of the third because stupid Americans would think that they had to have seen Jaws 1 and 2 before they see Jaws 3, King of King George Part 1, Part 2, or something. So she said, no, don't do that. And I said, but it is connected to the other one. So she says, you can do it in the subtitle. You can have the word remaking and constitution, which is, a gesture back to the words that made us America's constitutional conversation. So it is a perfecting. It is a tearing down. Slavery is a deeply entrenched practice. It influences everything. It influences family law, marriage law, adoption law, property law, trust and estates law, inheritance law. It's deeply entrenched in the fabric of law and society, and we're just ripping it up from the roots. Russian Revolution style. It's not gradual, phased-in emancipation of the, abolition of the sort that Pennsylvania does in 1780. Pennsylvania says, if you're a slave now, you're going to die a slave. But if you have a kid after this, your kid will eventually walk free. So we don't free slaves, but we end slavery. That was the gradually. That's not the 13th Amendment. It's immediate, uncompensated, universal emancipation, abolition everywhere. This is Russian Revolution style redistribution. Slaves are worth more, just the asset value, than anything else in America except real property. They're worth more than all the railroads, all the corporate stock. And so it is a ripping up and a building up. It is a reconstruction, a remaking. 13th Amendment is radical. And I'm proud of it. And Howard Zinn and others on the left who are dumping on America actually don't tell you the story of American greatness. This is a political mistake, AOC, okay? Because if people think that we on the left, I'm left of center, don't love America, we will lose elections. Instead of burning flags, try wrapping yourself in it, and that's what Abe Lincoln does. And he's got a system that has slavery. He says it's wrong, but we can fix it. And that's what MLK does. MLK claims the Constitution. He begins that speech it's in 1963 in front of the Lincoln Memorial. How would you begin it? Just the way he does. 50 years ago, okay? He's claiming Lincoln and the Constitution and the Declaration. He's not spitting on it. So it is a reconstruction. They are ripping stuff up, but they're also building on it. It's not a new Constitution. It's an amended Constitution, a renovated Constitution, a remade Constitution, a more perfect Constitution. Okay, and then my friend here next.
Thank you. Lincoln.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that Lincoln studied the Declaration and the Constitution in and out. How, in Lincoln's view, were those two documents related, and how did his view differ from someone like Stephen Douglas?
So Stephen Douglas says all men are created equal doesn't mean whites. Doesn't mean blacks. And Lincoln said, you just made that up. You pulled that out of your ass. And he didn't have Google. He said, no one said that 5 years ago. And now every single member of your party is saying the election was stolen. I'm getting a little confused. Okay, this is how memes work. You just throw out this big lie, and it's in the political interest of one party to go with that. And then all of a sudden, everyone starts saying, the emperor is fully clad. No. And Lincoln is saying, this is amazing. He says, no one said all men are created equal meant only white people 5 years ago. No one said that. You just made it up. And Roger Taney said that, and Dred Scott. Now everyone in your party is saying that. So, wow. That's interesting. And he's right when you use the Wayback Machine, the Google, and you actually, people weren't saying it before. And he's telling you something really interesting about how partisanship can work, where one party finds it in their interest to say all sorts of things that aren't true, and they keep saying it until they actually lose. And then they have to, and you're the umpires of political truth. So Lincoln thinks the following. Yes, they had slavery, and they didn't get rid of it, and they couldn't because South Carolina would never have agreed to get rid of it immediately. Why did they say then all men are created equal? Because you didn't need it just to stage a revolution against Britain. You could just say, here are all the stupid things that Charles III, George III, has done, and we don't like these idiotic things. You could have just said that. That was enough to declare independence. These united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. But no, they insisted on giving a bunch of reasons, and not just things about George III, but beginning with certain abstract truths. Why did they do that? This is Lincoln's view. I give you 10 different interpretations, but you ask me how Lincoln thinks about it. He says, here's why they did. They did it because Americans are a moral people, and they were about to appeal to heaven, go to war, which is a wager of heaven, and the God of the universe would decide. They are appealing to for the rectitude of their actions to the supreme judge of the universe. That's the Declaration of Independence. And you can't ask. He descends from Quakers, and you can't ask for God's blessing if you have total evil in your heart. So they say all men are created equal because they believe the proposition that slavery is wrong. No one's actually born a master or born a slave. Equal in what respect? Equally tall? No. Equally smart? No. Equally virtuous? No. Equal in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No one is born a slave in proper principles or born a master. That's Lincoln's vision. It's going to expand. It's going to become equal birthright citizenship, which is a different thing than equality of non-slavery. That's universal. That's true in every jurisdiction across the land. That's mathematical, Euclidean. Lincoln is very mathematical. He's very into logic, okay? It's going to become later on a narrower and deeper idea, birthright citizenship, if you're born in America, which is a different thing than and that's not just being free, but being a citizen with certain rights. But initially, he says, he doesn't favor black citizenship initially. He says, I'm not in favor of Negro citizenship in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He's going to grow for various reasons. I will show you how he grows after he meets Frederick Douglass and others. But his initial idea is we put it in there, even though we didn't have to commit to each other that slavery is actually wrong. No one should be a slave. And that would be our North Star, so to speak. That would be the goal toward which future generations of Americans should aspire. We're going to get to the moon in this decade, says Jack Kennedy. Okay, it's a goal for us. That's Lincoln's interpretation, and the Constitution needs to fulfill the Declaration rather than betray it. And so we're going to have to, yes, it protects slavery in all sorts of ways. It has 3/5 clause. It has fugitive slave clause. But our job is to eventually put slavery on a path of ultimate extinction. That's his idea. Thesis, slavery is wrong. He says, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember a time I did not so think and feel. This is visceral for him. He says that. He hates slavery. He says that. He says, I hate slavery. Thesis, and yet, our way of life depends on oil. Slavery. Okay, so it's killing us, and our way of life depends on it. It's wrong, and we can't get rid of it immediately. Perhaps. Thesis, antithesis. What's his synthesis? We must put it on a path of ultimate extinction. We can haggle about how we do that, but first, let's stop it from spreading. It's a cancer. We have to stop it from spreading. In the 1950s, this would be known as containment. For Dwight Eisenhower and communism, an evil empire. Have to stop it from spreading, and then we radiate it, and we can shrink it down, and then we get rid of it. That's his thesis. That's his idea about how the Declaration fits with the Constitution, fits with what his generation should do, and you can read all about it. And because I've only just given you a little, but I hope that's actually an answer to the specific question you asked. Lincoln, Declaration, Constitution, relationship. Discuss.
You mentioned how important truths are, both good and bad. But over history, these stories can change over time. So how do we protect that? How do we protect and propagate truths across generations?
There's no substitute for just knowing your facts. And when I disagree with someone, I'll give you a citation saying, for another view, see, and here's why I think that view is wrong. That's how Yale's motto is lux et veritas, light and truth. Harvard's is veritas, truth. There's just no substitute for just getting your facts right. And Lincoln is proverbially honest. He actually is. He has earned that moniker. And Stephen Douglas is not. No one ever called him Honest Stephen Douglas, and I wouldn't buy a used carriage from that man. Okay? And I'll give you the evidence for that in this book. And America, look, and this is what Howard Zinn doesn't tell you, and AOC doesn't tell you. She tells you everything that's wrong about America, but she doesn't feel it. I know what it feels like. I'm first-generation American. I'm born here, and I'm so damn lucky to be born here, and I don't take it for granted. My parents aren't citizens when I'm born, and this guy's trying to take away my citizenship. But no, God damn it, the 14th Amendment's first sentence makes me a birthright citizen, and I can claim this thing, but I don't take it for granted because I got 24 first cousins, and a lot of them aren't here, and they'd love to be here. And the ones who are here don't want to go elsewhere. So truth. How do we, we have to just know our facts. And you're going to have to read the books. There's just no quite substitute. At least the leaders do, and you are leaders. You're coming out here and spending time. You're intellectuals. You're in a library. But Stephen Douglas is not honest, and Roger Taney is not honest. Now I'll tell you a truth. I believe that no country has ever produced and picked as its leader anyone more impressive than Lincoln. And I go through, here's a list of people, and we Americans actually at one time did. Now, why can't we do it again? And I want you to see the story of how that happened. Now, that's not something I can prove mathematically, but, I do give you just, for example, a list, okay? I say, I challenge naysayers to identify any major political figure in post-1800 American politics, heck, in post-1800 world politics, who was better net all in, either as a leader or as a human. Don't compare Abe to Christ, although many did when he died. He gets shot on Good Friday. Compare him to Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Daniel Webster, Stephen Douglas, FDR, Ronald Reagan, William Pitt the Younger, Queen Victoria, William Gladstone, David Lloyd George, Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, Otto von Bismarck, Konrad Adenauer, Angela Merkel, Napoleon Bonaparte, Charles de Gaulle, Simon Bolivar, Benito Juarez, Jawaharlal Nehru, Golda Meir, Nelson Mandela, or anyone else in the last 225 years. No modern country has ever produced and then picked as its supreme leader anyone better than Abe, and he was honest, not connected to truth. We picked a truthful guy.
I think we have time for one last question. So.
I'll do two left. Yes, I'm filing an amicus brief with my brother, Vic. I've been asked by a distinguished publication here in this city known as the Gray Lady to write a piece about that. I'm very optimistic that the Supreme Court will do the right thing because it's actually clear. And facts matter, and words matter, and truth matters. So one more question. Maybe my friend here, we haven't had as many women jump in. Did you want Yeah, I want at least one woman and at least one. We have a woman who hasn't had. Yeah, and then I'll take one more. How about over here, my friend over here in the blue, and then keep the mic. You can keep the mic, and then you. Okay, well.
Thank you. I was curious when you, as somebody who grew up reading Howard Zinn's interpretation, how you envision...
My kids read that too.
Yeah.
Yes, drives me crazy.
Yes. Yes. I was curious how you see your ideas being transmitted in a compelling and accessible way.
Yes. Well, the books are too long, and that's a real problem, perhaps. Zinn was good as a counter-narrative. If we were getting too much of a rah-rah story, and he's saying what they didn't teach you. But now people don't read anything except Zinn, and it's really one-sided if you're only getting something that actually was designed merely to counterpunch and not to tell you actually a balanced tale. So we've overcorrected massively. America has done lots of bad things, and maybe they didn't teach me that in 8th grade, but Zinn doesn't tell me about all the things that America did do right. Again, compared to Mao, compared to Ho, compared to Fidel, compared to Stalin and Hitler and Putin. So, wow, what are we talking about? Okay, because if we are so crappy, why did my parents want to come here? Because they didn't want to go to the Soviet Union, that's for sure. And Zinn doesn't have good accounts of the greatness of America. Doesn't have good accounts of the greatness of Lincoln, about the society that produced him and then picked him. Doesn't explain this remaking, which is epic, or even how impressive the founding was net. Doesn't tell you that abolition is born here, and that the making of the Constitution was nothing less than the big bang of human history. Before the American Constitution, there's democracy very few places in the world, and none of them ever put the thing to a vote. Not Periclean Athens under the Cleisthenic Constitution, not ancient pre-imperial Rome, not Florence, Venice, the Dutch Republic, the Brits, the Swiss. No one did what Americans did, which is put first principles down in a small, short text and get ordinary people to vote on it. The big bang of human history. There's BC, before the Constitution, AD, after the document. That's actually the history of the world. And Zinn misses everything, as does Beard, and then they don't tell you about the remaking really in this way. And we're not done, because what about, they don't tell you about how amazing the suffrage movement was in America, or in my lifetime, getting rid of poll tax disfranchisement and lots of stuff. Young people voting, young adults voting. I promised you'd get your...
All right,
what,
yes, and then that's our last
we're
question.
done.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm reading Du Bois's biography of John Brown, and in thinking about abolition, I'm kind of curious. I'm excited to read your book, but I'm kind of curious how you dealt with the tension between figures, as you mentioned, like Lincoln, who are kind of abolitionist in an aspirational way, in a let's figure it out along the way, eventually way.
Yes.
Versus somebody like John Brown, who saw it as his moral duty to lay his life down, and the lives of his sons, and the lives of his family members.
Yeah. I'm not a John Brown guy, and he was a lunatic, and he was murdering people, who didn't deserve to be murdered, innocent people. So do not actually valorize this terrorist. And Lincoln didn't. And if he had, he would never have been elected. And so let me read you what Lincoln actually says about John Brown, because the Republican Party stiff arms him, and there's a reason why, because he's politically toxic. And if you start talking that way, I know who's the mayor of this town, and if that's our platform, I'm a political scientist, a national platform, we're going to lose. Okay? So, because America's in the middle. And here's what Abraham Lincoln says about John Brown. This is in Elwood, Kansas. And you should read all about the Potawatomi Massacre and other things. Lincoln, quote, believed the attack of Brown wrong for two reasons. First, it was a violation of law. Lincoln's a legalist. No, you don't get, ICE can't kill us, and we can't kill ICE. That's not how we do it. Okay. Second, it was, this is a quote, as all such attacks must be, futile as far as any effect it might have on the extinction of a great evil. Lincoln elaborates. We have a means provided for the expression of our belief in regard to slavery. It is through the ballot box, the peaceful method provided by the Constitution. John Brown has shown great courage, rare unselfishness, but no man, North or South, can approve of violence or crime. That's why he gets elected, because he says, we're not the John Brown party. We're the party that's going to, and slavery is a great evil. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember a time I did not so think and feel. I hate slavery, but we don't do it by force of arms. That's Lincoln's view. You can disagree with him, but, I think he's great in a way that John Brown wasn't. And just to repeat, John Brown, whatever you think of Harper's Ferry and the raid, John Brown murdered a lot of innocent people in Kansas way before that. And you need to know that. That's the truth. Do not have him or Che or Mao or... Do you know how many tens of millions of people died under Mao in the Great Leap Forward, through famine and the Cultural Revolution? Tens of millions. So I'll end by quoting another great citizen of this great city. Not Vladimir Lenin, but John Lennon. You say you want a revolution. Well, we all want to change the world. But if you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. So I'm not a John Brown guy. I'm a Harriet Beecher Stowe guy, a Frederick Douglass guy, who in the end doesn't go all in with Brown, an Abe Lincoln guy, and an Elizabeth Cady Stanton guy. They used their words. They convinced other people. It was slower. Young people are impatient. Believe it or not, I was once young. And so I'm not a John Brown guy, and neither was Lincoln. And Lincoln gets himself elected and reelected. And that is an interesting thing for us to think about. Thank you very much.